The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Everyone had gathered for a high-profile trial, one that was supposed to be straightforward. The judge, a seasoned veteran named Judge Davis, sat at the center of the room, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd as the case unfolded. But no one could have predicted what was about to happen. Malik Wright, a 17-year-old black teenager, stood nervously at the edge of the courtroom, his heart racing. He wasn't a lawyer, at least not yet, but today, he was about to find himself in the most pivotal moment of his life. A witness in a trial that had already caused enough drama to fill a season of reality TV. But this wasn't about drama. This was about justice. And Malik had a front-row seat. Judge Davis, with his well-worn robe and a reputation for being tough on anyone who dared to challenge him, couldn't resist making a jab. He looked Malik up and down, his lips curling into a sarcastic smile. Well, Judge Davis drawled, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom. I see we have a young man here today who thinks he's a lawyer. Tell me, Mr. Wright, what makes you think you can contribute anything of value to this court? You look like you belong in high school, not in my courtroom. A few chuckles rippled through the gallery. Some of the lawyers present exchanged knowing glances, already predicting Malik's failure. He was young, inexperienced, and, let's face it, he didn't look the part. But Malik wasn't shaken. He had spent countless hours studying law, teaching himself the intricacies of the legal system, and he knew this moment wasn't about proving anyone wrong, it was about proving to himself that he belonged. Judge Davis wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the polished wood. I don't know, Mr. Wright, maybe you'd be better off staying in school and playing basketball. I'm sure you've got more of a future there. Another round of laughter. The crowd was enjoying the spectacle, and Malik could feel the heat rising in his chest. The judge's words stung, but they didn't break him. He had been underestimated his whole life, especially because of his skin color. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was that he had a voice, and today, it would be heard. Malik stood tall, his posture straightening, his eyes locking with Judge Davis's. Your Honor, he began, his voice calm but filled with quiet intensity. I may not look like a typical lawyer, but I know the law, and I'm here to help ensure that justice is served, just like anyone else who stands before you. The room fell silent. The smug smile on Judge Davis's face faltered for just a moment, but he quickly regained his composure, choosing to mock the teen instead of acknowledging his courage. Oh really? I'm sure you've studied a few cases online, huh? Maybe you can tell me something that I don't already know. The gallery watched, some holding their breath. They were expecting Malik to falter, to stammer under the pressure of being ridiculed by someone far more experienced than him. But they were wrong. Malik took a deep breath, his mind racing through everything he had learned. He wasn't going to back down. Well, Malik continued, I've studied the case in question. And while I'm not a lawyer yet, I've read the legal briefs. I understand the statutes. And if you'll allow me, Your Honor, I'd like to present a perspective that I believe might help the court see this matter in a different light. Judge Davis's eyes narrowed, clearly skeptical. A perspective, he repeated, sounding incredulous. And what exactly could a kid like you bring to the table? Malik felt the weight of the courtroom's judgment, the tension thick in the air. But he wasn't there to prove something to them. He was there to prove something to himself. That despite the odds stacked against him, despite the prejudices and barriers that came with being a black teenager in a predominantly white, upper-class courtroom, he could hold his ground. He didn't wait for the judge to finish speaking. He knew that hesitation meant weakness. Instead, he opened the case files that he had brought with him, papers filled with details he had meticulously studied for weeks, and pointed to a clause in the legal documents that no one had yet addressed. His voice was firm, now full of the confidence that came from deep knowledge rather than arrogance. This clause here, Malik said, pointing to the page, indicates that the initial ruling was based on a misunderstanding of the law. The defendant's actions, while certainly questionable, don't meet the threshold for the charges levied against him. If you look at Section 12 of the relevant statute, it's clear that intent plays a much larger role in this case than the prosecution has acknowledged. A ripple of surprise spread across the room. Malik had caught everyone off guard, even the experienced lawyers who had written off the young man as just another kid trying to be something he wasn't. The silence was thick, and for the first time, Judge Davis didn't have a response immediately ready. His gaze shifted from Malik to the papers, back to Malik, as if searching for some mistake or weakness he could pounce on. But there was none. The clock ticked in the background, marking the passing seconds, each one heavier than the last. Malik could feel the tension lifting just slightly, and for the first time, he sensed a shift. Maybe it wasn't much yet, but it was a start. "Well, Mr. Wright," Judge Davis said, his voice quieter than before, "it seems you've given us something to think about. We'll revisit this point later." The courtroom murmured. Malik could feel the eyes of everyone on him, not with ridicule now, but with curiosity. They were watching him, not just because he was a teenager, but because he had just proven something. He had shown that he wasn't afraid to challenge authority. That he was prepared to fight for what he believed in, even when others doubted him. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Malik Wright had always been different. Not in the way he looked. He was tall and athletic, with a wide smile and deep brown eyes that reflected both wisdom and curiosity. But in the way he thought. In a world where many were content to let their circumstances define them, Malik had always believed that his future didn't have to be shaped by his past. Growing up in the heart of a rough neighborhood in Atlanta, Malik had seen it all. Gunshots echoing in the streets, the sound of sirens always just a few seconds away, and the faces of friends and family who seemed resigned to a life of struggle. His mother had worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, and his father. He wasn't in the picture, gone before Malik had even learned how to walk. But Malik had something his peers didn't, his grandmother, Evelyn Wright. She was the heart of the family, the matriarch who kept them grounded and moving forward, no matter how difficult life became. She would often tell Malik stories about the importance of education, of knowledge, and how the world can't hold you back if you know how to navigate it. To Evelyn, education wasn't just about books, it was about survival. Every day after school, Malik would head to his grandmother's small apartment, where they would sit together at her warm kitchen table, sipping tea and talking about everything from history to philosophy. Evelyn wasn't just his grandmother, she was his mentor. She taught him how to think critically, how to question the world around him, and most importantly, how to never settle for less. "Malik, your skin doesn't define you. Your mind does," she would often say, with a wise, yet tender smile. "Don't let anyone tell you who you are. You get to decide that." Those words stuck with Malik as he got older. While most kids in his neighborhood looked up to athletes and entertainers, Malik's heroes were people like Thurgood Marshall and Maya Angelou, individuals who had fought for justice and equality in a world that wasn't always kind to them. He devoured books on law and civil rights, sometimes spending late nights reading Supreme Court decisions or essays on the Constitution, a world far removed from his own but one he dreamed of being a part of. His friends didn't understand it. They thought he was strange, a little too serious, maybe a bit too much of a nerd for someone from their neighborhood. They didn't get why he spent hours poring over legal cases or why he wasn't out playing basketball like everyone else. But to Malik, the answers to his life didn't lie on a basketball court or in a rap lyric, they lay in the law, in understanding the rules that govern the world and using that knowledge to change it. He wasn't blind to the challenges around him. He knew that growing up black in America came with its own set of obstacles, both seen and unseen. The systemic racism that he had witnessed firsthand, the limited opportunities in his community, and the constant barrage of stereotypes that threatened to define him, all of it was enough to make anyone feel defeated. But Malik refused to let those forces shape his destiny. Malik's dream was simple, he wanted to be a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who could stand in a courtroom and fight for the underdog, for those who couldn't speak for themselves. He didn't just want to win cases, he wanted to change lives. The legal system was flawed, but Malik believed that with the right knowledge, he could make it work for him and for others who were oppressed and marginalized. That dream had taken root early. In high school, while his classmates partied and planned their futures around sports or entertainment, Malik focused on getting top grades. He joined the debate team, where he quickly became known as a force to be reckoned with, able to argue any point with precision and conviction. But despite his achievements, the doors to opportunity remained closed. His grades were good, but his background wasn't. The college scholarships he dreamed of never came, and he couldn't afford to apply to schools outside of Georgia. He applied to every scholarship he could find, and when he wasn't studying, he worked part-time jobs to save up for law school. One day, after a long shift at the local grocery store, Malik came home to find his grandmother waiting for him at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in front of her. She looked at him, her eyes soft yet steady. "You're working hard, Malik. But you need to believe in yourself, too. Don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it." Malik sat down beside her, exhausted but determined. "I don't need anyone's help, Grandma. I'll figure it out on my own." Evelyn smiled, her expression knowing. "You don't have to do everything by yourself. But you're right about one thing, you've got to figure it out on your own. Just make sure you don't let anyone tell you that you can't." Her words were a challenge, one that Malik took to heart. He knew his journey wasn't going to be easy. But he wasn't afraid of the fight. In fact, it was the fight he was born for. And as much as his life had been defined by struggle, it was also a life defined by resilience. He wasn't going to let anything stop him, not a judge in a courtroom, not the weight of society's expectations, and certainly not the prejudices that tried to box him in. Malik didn't know how he would get to law school. He didn't know how he would overcome the financial barriers that stood in his way. But he knew one thing for sure, he was going to keep pushing forward. And he wasn't going to let anyone, especially not a judge, tell him he wasn't good enough. As he sat there in the courtroom, waiting for his moment, he thought about all the people who had doubted him, who had told him he would never make it. He thought about the countless hours spent studying, the times he felt like giving up, and the unspoken understanding that if he didn't fight for himself, no one else would. But today, Malik was fighting. He wasn't just fighting for his future, he was fighting for every person who had ever been told they weren't enough. Every person who had ever been dismissed because of their race, their background, or their age. Malik was ready to take on the world. And as he stood there in front of Judge Davis, he knew this was only the beginning. The courtroom felt colder now, more intense, as Malik stood firm under the judge's skeptical gaze. The moment of silence that followed his defense hung thick in the air like the calm before a storm. People were still processing the fact that a teenager had just outsmarted the seasoned Judge Davis in his own courtroom. But what none of them realized was that Malik wasn't just playing this game of words and logic, he was proving a point. To himself. To the judge. And to everyone who had ever doubted him. Judge Davis sat up straighter in his chair, his expression unreadable. The chuckles that had rippled through the courtroom earlier had vanished, replaced by a deep and unsettling silence. The older lawyers in the room exchanged glances, and for the first time since the trial began, they seemed unsure of how to proceed. "Mr. Wright," Judge Davis said, his tone measured but sharp, "you've made a point. I'll give you that. But don't mistake this for a win. You still have much to learn about how things work in this courtroom." The judge's eyes didn't leave Malik's face, trying to convey authority, trying to put Malik back in his place. Malik didn't flinch. He had expected this. The judge wasn't about to admit defeat. He was a man of ego, and in his world, young people, especially black teenagers, didn't have the right to outsmart him. But Malik had no intention of backing down. He had worked too hard to get here, to let his moment be defined by Judge Davis's narrow view of the world. "I understand, Your Honor," Malik responded calmly, his voice unwavering. "But I believe that sometimes it's not about learning how things work, but about learning how they should work." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some of the lawyers raised their eyebrows, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the response they expected from a teenager, least of all one who had just been mocked by a judge known for his tough demeanor. But Malik wasn't just any teenager. And this was no ordinary day. Judge Davis looked down at his notes, obviously trying to regain control of the situation. "We'll proceed," he muttered, his voice edged with frustration. "But this court is not a place for amateur theatrics. Stay within the boundaries of your role, Mr. Wright." Malik's heart raced, but his hands remained steady. He had already proven that he could stand up to the judge. The rest of the trial, though, would test him in ways he hadn't yet imagined. He knew that being in the courtroom was only the beginning. The real challenge would come when the stakes were higher, when his integrity, his knowledge, and his resilience would be pushed to their breaking point. The trial moved forward, but the tension between Malik and Judge Davis was palpable. Every time Malik spoke, the judge seemed to lean in with increasing suspicion, as if trying to unearth a flaw in his arguments. Yet, Malik's preparation had been meticulous. He had studied the case inside and out, pored over legal textbooks, and gone through the details of every piece of evidence. Malik knew the facts better than anyone else in that room, and it showed. But while Malik remained calm and focused, his mind was racing. He couldn't let his guard down. He had been in situations like this before, where people tried to break him down, to make him feel like he didn't belong. But every time, he found a way to rise above. The opposing counsel, a well-dressed man in his mid-40s named Mr. Richardson, had noticed the subtle shift in the room. He had been eyeing Malik with growing unease, especially after the young man's impressive display earlier. Richardson wasn't about to let some teenager steal the spotlight, and he certainly wasn't going to let Malik make him look bad. "Your Honor," Mr. Richardson said, cutting through the growing tension, "while I appreciate Mr. Wright's enthusiasm, I believe this case requires a level of expertise and experience that he simply doesn't possess. This is a serious legal matter, not a debate club." Malik felt his pulse quicken at the remark. It wasn't just an attack on his skills, it was an attack on everything he stood for. But he couldn't let it affect him, not now. Not when he was so close to making his mark. "Mr. Richardson," Malik said, his voice cutting through the room with surprising clarity, "I may not have years of experience, but I have something far more valuable, the ability to see through the cracks, to look beyond what people want you to see." The room fell silent again. Malik's words, sharp and direct, held the room in place. Even Judge Davis couldn't hide the flicker of something. Was it respect? Discomfort, that flashed across his face. "Let's proceed with the case," Judge Davis said finally, the tension in his voice now laced with a grudging acknowledgement. "But Mr. Wright, I suggest you stick to the facts from now on." Malik nodded. "Understood, Your Honor." He may not have won the battle yet, but he could feel the tide turning. The judge, the lawyers, and the spectators, they were all starting to see him not as a young kid with big dreams, but as someone who knew exactly what he was doing. And that, for Malik, was a victory in itself. The remainder of the trial was a blur of arguments and counterarguments. Malik worked tirelessly, cross-examining witnesses with the precision of someone far older than his years. He was gaining ground, and the more he spoke, the more the room's energy shifted. What started as skepticism had now turned into reluctant admiration. Yet, even in the face of this success, Malik couldn't forget why he was there. It wasn't just about proving something to Judge Davis or to anyone else in the room, it was about the bigger picture. About showing that no one, no matter their age or background, should ever be counted out. And with every word he spoke, he was doing just that. As the day came to a close and the judge adjourned the court, Malik felt a mix of exhaustion and triumph. He had done something few could ever imagine, a teenager standing toe-to-toe with legal professionals, holding his own with poise and intelligence. Outside the courthouse, the world seemed to pulse with energy. Malik's phone buzzed with texts from his grandmother, and he couldn't help but smile as he read them. "You did good, Malik. I knew you could. But this is only the beginning. You've got the heart and the mind of a lawyer. Just remember, it's not about winning the case, it's about winning the fight for justice." Malik smiled and looked up at the sky, knowing that this wasn't just a personal victory, it was a step toward a future he had been working toward for as long as he could remember. And as he walked away from the courthouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of something much bigger than just one case. The journey was far from over. Malik sat quietly in the waiting room of the courthouse, his thoughts swirling. His mind was still racing from the trial, replaying every moment, the words he had spoken, the way the judge had looked at him when he finally made his point. His victory was undeniable, but deep down, Malik knew this was just the beginning. If he was going to make it in this world, if he was going to make a real difference, he had to be prepared for more than just a courtroom win. He needed to be prepared for the long road ahead. As the minutes ticked by, the door to the waiting room swung open, and a familiar face appeared. It was Andrea Evans, a fellow intern at the law firm Malik had recently started working for. Andrea was older than Malik, a college graduate with a passion for corporate law, but she had always been kind to him. She had taken him under her wing when he first started, guiding him through the basics of legal research and giving him tips on how to handle the pressure of being the youngest person in the room. "Hey, Malik, how's it going?" she asked, a warm smile on her face. Malik stood up, returning the smile. "It's going well. Still processing everything from the trial. I didn't expect things to go the way they did." "I heard about it," Andrea said, her tone impressed. "You really held your own. Judge Davis doesn't make it easy for anyone, especially not someone so young." Malik nodded. "Yeah, it was tough. But it felt good. I felt like I was finally proving that I'm more than just a kid from the wrong side of town." Andrea's smile softened. "You're proving a lot more than that. You're showing people that you have the brains and the guts to be a great lawyer. But be careful. People like Judge Davis aren't the only ones who will challenge you. There are others out there, much more dangerous than him." Malik frowned. "What do you mean?" Andrea leaned in slightly, her voice lowering. "You're a smart kid, Malik, but you've got to remember one thing, people don't like to be proven wrong. You've stepped into a world where your skills and your background will always be questioned. You'll face challenges that you never saw coming, people who will try to tear you down just because you're not what they expect." Malik felt a wave of uncertainty ripple through him, but he pushed it aside. "I'm ready for whatever comes. I've been fighting all my life to get to this point." Andrea gave him a pointed look, as if sizing him up. "Just don't let that fight cloud your judgment. You're not just fighting for your future, you're fighting for every person who's been overlooked or underestimated. But you can't let pride get in your way." Before Malik could respond, the door to the waiting room opened again, and their boss, Mr. Harrison, walked in. He was a senior partner at the law firm, known for his sharp legal mind and no-nonsense attitude. His eyes swept over both of them, and he gave a small nod of acknowledgement. "Malik, Andrea," he said, his voice carrying the authority that only someone at his level could command. "We need you both in the conference room. The firm's taken on a new case, and I want you two to be a part of it." Malik's heart skipped a beat. A new case? This could be his chance to prove himself on a bigger stage, to show the firm, and the legal world, that he wasn't just a teenager with a dream. He followed Andrea down the hallway, trying to control the excitement that bubbled up inside him. The conference room was spacious and sleek, the walls lined with bookshelves full of legal texts. At the head of the table sat Mr. Harrison, who motioned for Malik and Andrea to take a seat. "Listen up, both of you," Mr. Harrison began, his voice steady and direct. We've just been handed a high-profile case, one that could make or break this firm. It's a civil rights lawsuit against a large corporation accused of discriminatory hiring practices. The plaintiff is a woman named Lisa Caldwell, a former employee who claims that she was fired because of her race. Malik's eyes widened. A civil rights case. This was exactly the kind of work he had always dreamed of doing. Helping people who had been wronged, fighting for justice in the face of corruption. But he also knew this case would come with enormous pressure. The stakes couldn't be higher. You two will be handling the research and initial discovery process, Mr. Harrison continued. We need to gather evidence, interview witnesses, and build a solid foundation for the case. Andrea, you'll lead the charge, but Malik, he paused, his eyes narrowing. I want to see what you can do. You've got talent, but I need to know you're ready for something this serious. Malik's stomach tightened, but he forced himself to keep his voice steady. I'm ready, Mr. Harrison. I won't let you down. Mr. Harrison gave him a curt nod. Good. I'll expect results. Now, get to work. Andrea, I'll leave the details to you. As Mr. Harrison left the room, Andrea turned to Malik, her expression a mix of excitement and concern. This is a huge opportunity, Malik. But I need to warn you, this case will test everything you've got. The firm's reputation is on the line, and there are people out there who won't hesitate to make things difficult for us. Malik nodded, his mind already running through the possibilities. He could feel the weight of the case settling on his shoulders, but he wasn't afraid. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to prove himself, to show everyone that he belonged in this world. He couldn't afford to mess it up. Let's get to work, then, Malik said, determination in his voice. Andrea smiled, impressed by his resolve. That's the spirit. Let's make sure we do this right. The next few days passed in a blur of research, interviews, and meetings. Malik spent hours digging through legal databases, looking for any precedent that could help their case. He interviewed Lisa Caldwell, the plaintiff, listening intently as she told her story of being passed over for promotions, discriminated against by her colleagues, and eventually fired for reasons that seemed less and less justifiable the more Malik heard. Her story was heartbreaking, but it was also familiar. Malik had heard similar tales from people in his own community, stories of being overlooked or mistreated because of the color of their skin, stories that often went unheard. This was his chance to amplify those voices, to make sure Lisa's story wasn't just another forgotten case. He knew that if he got this right, he could change the lives of people who had been silenced for too long. But with every new piece of evidence he uncovered, Malik could feel the pressure building. The opposition wasn't going to play fair, and the closer he got to the truth, the more dangerous things would become. This was no longer just about law, it was about justice. And Malik was about to find out just how far he was willing to go to get it. The stakes had never been higher, and Malik knew that his fight had only just begun. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Malik found himself at the center of it all, fully immersed in the case that could make or break his career, yet it felt bigger than just a career. This case was about proving that a system built on privilege and power could be dismantled, brick by brick. It was about showing everyone, especially himself, that he wasn't just a kid who got lucky in one trial. He was a force to be reckoned with. Malik spent long hours at the law firm, working late into the night, reviewing case files, and cross-referencing details that seemed insignificant at first glance. Andrea was a rock, guiding him through the technicalities of the legal process, but she also knew this case had a personal weight for him. He wasn't just trying to win, he was fighting for the kind of justice that could change lives. One afternoon, Malik was in the firm's library, hunched over a pile of papers, when Andrea appeared with a thick legal binder in her hands. Her brow furrowed as she glanced at the stack of paperwork in front of him. "Malik, are you eating or sleeping at all?" she asked, half joking, half concerned. Malik looked up, blinking at the sudden interruption. "What do you mean?" "I'm fine. Andrea crossed her arms and leaned against the table, her eyes softening. I know you're passionate about this case, but you need to take care of yourself. You can't win this fight if you're running on empty. Malik sighed, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his eyes. He hadn't realized how much the case was consuming him until she pointed it out. I know. I feel like this is my chance. If I let it slip by, if I don't give it everything I've got, then I'll never get another shot like this. Andrea nodded, her expression understanding but serious. I get it. But remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. If you burn yourself out now, you'll miss the bigger picture. Malik paused for a moment, then nodded. Okay, I'll take a break. Just a quick one. Andrea smiled and handed him the binder. Good. Here's what I've got for you. We're scheduled to meet with the opposing counsel, and I want you to go over their strategy. We need to know what we're up against. Malik opened the binder, scanning the pages. The opposing firm was as tough as they came, and they weren't about to let a case like this go without a fight. Malik knew that they would do anything to discredit Lisa and her claim. He could already picture the attorneys, their polished suits and perfectly rehearsed smiles, dismissing Lisa's experience as a fluke. They would twist every fact, every piece of evidence, to make her look like a liar. But Malik wasn't going to let that happen. As the day wore on, Malik and Andrea worked side by side, poring over the evidence and preparing for their upcoming meeting with the opposition. The room was filled with the quiet hum of concentration, the only sounds being the rustle of papers and the click of keyboards. Despite the tension in the air, Malik could feel the momentum building. They were getting closer, piece by piece, to something big. Late that evening, as Malik was about to head out, Andrea pulled him aside. I've been thinking, she said, her tone serious. This case is getting more complicated by the day. And if the opposing counsel starts pushing back harder, we might need to play a little dirty. I'm not talking about breaking any laws, but we might have to get creative if we want to win. Malik raised an eyebrow. What do you mean by creative? Andrea gave him a look that suggested she had a plan but wasn't sure if Malik was ready for it. There's a strategy I've used in the past, but it's risky. We'd need to dig into the personal lives of the people involved, the ones with the power to make decisions. If we find something, anything, that could put pressure on them, we might be able to force a settlement. Malik considered this for a moment. He'd heard about these tactics before, finding weaknesses in your opponent and using them to your advantage. But it felt like a line he wasn't sure he wanted to cross. He wasn't in this fight just to win, he was in it for the right reasons. I don't know, Malik said, shaking his head. That doesn't feel like the right move to me. I want to win this case on the facts, not on anyone's personal failings. Andrea looked at him for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. I get it. But I just want you to know that if we go the traditional route, we could be here for months. And that's time Lisa doesn't have. Malik took a deep breath. I appreciate it, Andrea. But we'll play it clean. I'll trust the facts to carry us through. Andrea smiled, though there was a hint of something unreadable in her eyes. Okay. I respect that. Just be ready for whatever comes next. The following days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and preparation. Malik's life outside of work began to blur as well. He barely had time to check in with his grandmother, who had been texting him non-stop to remind him to take care of himself. She was proud of him, of course, but Malik knew that her concern was just as much about his health as it was about his future. As the day of the deposition approached, Malik began to feel the pressure mounting. The deposition was the first real confrontation between the two sides, and it would set the tone for the rest of the case. If they could get the opposing counsel to back off even a little, it would be a victory. But Malik also knew that this was where things would get tricky. The opposing attorneys were going to throw everything they had at Lisa and her credibility. They would accuse her of exaggerating her experiences, of playing the victim. And it was going to take all of Malik's skill and resolve to stand firm in the face of it. The night before the deposition, Malik sat alone in his apartment, reviewing his notes one last time. His phone buzzed with a message from his grandmother. "I'm praying for you, Malik. You're stronger than you think. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." He smiled and typed back, "Thanks, Grandma. I won't let you down." But as he stared at the screen, Malik knew that tomorrow would be one of the toughest days of his life. He was ready for the fight, but he also knew that this case wasn't just about winning or losing, it was about making a statement. And no matter what happened in the deposition, he would never back down. The morning of the deposition dawned with an oppressive sense of urgency. Malik woke up earlier than usual, his mind already running through the key points he needed to emphasize during the questioning. He knew this day would test everything he had learned so far, the research, the strategy, and his ability to stay calm under pressure. If they could win the deposition, it could set the tone for the entire case. He couldn't afford to let anything slip. After grabbing a quick breakfast, Malik put on his best suit, the one that made him feel a little more like the lawyer he was striving to become. He caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror, adjusting his tie. His reflection didn't look like the kid who had once been told he wouldn't amount to anything. No, today he was someone with purpose, someone with a mission. As he walked out of his apartment, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Andrea. "We'll meet you at the firm. Be there early, prep time is crucial today." He texted back quickly, "Got it. I'm on my way." The drive to the firm felt like a blur, every street, every light, every stop sign passed in a haze. Malik's mind was laser-focused on the upcoming deposition. He kept going over the questions they had prepared, the responses they had rehearsed, and the strategy they had outlined. But deep down, Malik knew that a deposition wasn't just about facts. It was about emotions, about reading the room and knowing when to push and when to pull back. It was about winning hearts and minds, not just legal arguments. By the time he reached the law firm, the building was buzzing with activity. Andrea was already in the conference room, reviewing the final details with Mr. Harrison, who had come in early for the session. He nodded at Malik as he walked in, giving him a look that said, "I'm trusting you with this. Ready?" Andrea asked, standing up from the table and handing Malik a pile of documents. Her expression was calm, but Malik could see the tension in her eyes. They both knew how high the stakes were today. "As ready as I'll ever be," Malik replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Andrea smiled. "Good. Just remember, this is Lisa's moment. Let her tell her story. Your job is to make sure the truth gets through, no matter what the other side tries to do." Malik nodded, but the nerves were beginning to creep in. He had never been in a deposition like this before, where the power dynamics were so uneven, where one wrong move could tip the scales in the opposing counsel's favor. The corporate lawyers they were up against were masters at this. They would twist every word, every gesture, to try to discredit Lisa's testimony. Malik's phone buzzed again. It was a message from his grandmother. "Remember, you're not just fighting for the truth, Malik. You're fighting for all of us. Stay strong." The words gave him a moment of clarity. He wasn't just fighting for Lisa. He was fighting for the people who had been overlooked, underestimated, and silenced for far too long. This was about something bigger than himself. He couldn't let fear stop him now. The deposition room was cold, the kind of sterile, impersonal space meant to strip away any warmth or emotion. The opposing counsel had already arrived, a team of sharp-suited, perfectly poised attorneys, all ready to tear apart everything Lisa had worked so hard to build. They barely acknowledged Malik and Andrea as they entered, too focused on their strategy to give any attention to the opposing side. Mr. Harrison took his seat at the head of the table, a seasoned professional who exuded confidence. He gave Malik a quick nod, and Malik sat down, positioning himself between Lisa and Andrea. Lisa was visibly nervous, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched a piece of paper. Malik placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, offering a comforting smile. He needed her to know she wasn't alone in this. The lead attorney for the opposing counsel, a tall, sharply dressed man named Richard Thorne, stood up to address the room. His smile was smooth, practiced, and cold. "Let's begin," Thorne said. "We're here today to discuss the accusations made by Ms. Caldwell, who claims she was discriminated against based on her race. My first question, Ms. Caldwell, is quite simple. Why should we believe your version of events when the company has a spotless track record in diversity and inclusion?" Malik's heart sank. This was the opening move, the first of many attacks on Lisa's credibility. He had been expecting it, but it still hit him hard. Lisa, however, remained calm, her voice steady as she replied, "I'm not accusing the company of something without reason. I'm speaking about my own experience, the way I was treated differently from others in the same position, the way I was passed over for promotions time and time again." Thorne raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "But your claims are anecdotal at best. You have no concrete evidence that supports your accusations. No emails, no witnesses, just your word. How convenient." Malik could feel the pressure rising, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was exactly what they had prepared for, the strategy to belittle Lisa's testimony and cast doubt on her character. But Malik wasn't about to let that happen. Before Thorne could speak again, Malik stood up, interrupting him. "Objection," he said, his voice firm and controlled. "Ms. Caldwell's testimony is not just her word. It is a reflection of her lived experience within the company. We will provide evidence, and we have already outlined the patterns of behavior that show discrimination. This isn't just hearsay, it's a claim backed by fact." Thorne's eyes narrowed, clearly irritated by the interruption, but he recovered quickly. "Your objection is noted, Mr. Green. However, let's focus on the evidence, shall we?" Malik nodded, sitting back down. The questioning continued, and Thorne kept trying to push Lisa into a corner, attempting to paint her as a disgruntled former employee with no real case. But Malik was prepared. He had already anticipated every move Thorne would make. As the deposition went on, Malik made sure to highlight key pieces of evidence, emails that contradicted the company's claims, statements from other employees who had witnessed the discriminatory behavior, and most importantly, Lisa's unshakable consistency in her testimony. By the end of the session, Thorne was visibly frustrated. His usual smooth demeanor was slipping, replaced by thinly veiled hostility. Malik had done what he needed to do, he had forced the truth into the open. Lisa's story had been heard. She had been seen. As the deposition wrapped up, Mr. Harrison gave Malik a quick, approving glance. Andrea squeezed his shoulder, a silent sign of respect. Malik could feel the weight of the day lifting from his shoulders, but there was no time to relax, not yet. They still had a long road ahead of them. The opposing counsel had shown their hand, and Malik had held his ground. The next steps would be even tougher, but for the first time, he felt like he had a real chance of winning. He wasn't just fighting for Lisa anymore, he was fighting for justice itself. As Malik walked out of the room, he took a deep breath, knowing that the true battle was just beginning. But for the first time since the trial with Judge Davis, he felt something new, a sense of hope. Malik sat in his office late that evening, the weight of the day's events still pressing on his shoulders. The deposition had gone better than expected, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were only in the early stages of a long and difficult battle. The opposing counsel had been relentless, and he knew this was just a taste of the fight that lay ahead. Despite the small victories, Malik couldn't ignore the pressure that kept building. Lisa's case wasn't just about proving her story, it was about dismantling a system that had been in place for decades, a system that had allowed people like her to be overlooked and mistreated without consequence. But every step forward felt like they were up against a brick wall. Andrea had already left for the evening, but Malik was still deep in thought when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Lisa. "I don't know what to do, Malik. The company is offering me a settlement. They want me to drop the case and take the money. It's tempting, but I don't want to give up." Malik stared at the message for a moment, feeling a pang of frustration. This was the moment he had feared. The settlement was the company's way of trying to silence Lisa, to buy her out of the case. It wasn't justice, it was an attempt to erase her experience, to sweep everything under the rug. He quickly typed a response. "Lisa, I know the offer is tempting, but don't let them buy your silence. The case isn't just about the money, it's about making sure this never happens again. We're fighting for something bigger." He hesitated for a second, then added, "I believe in you. Stay strong." Malik put his phone down, leaning back in his chair. It was moments like this that tested him the most, when the easy way out was staring him in the face. Lisa was exhausted, scared, and the offer from the company must have seemed like the solution to her problems. But Malik knew that once she accepted the settlement, the case would be over. The chance to bring the truth to light, to make a real difference, would slip away. As much as he wanted to assure her everything would be okay, Malik couldn't promise that. This case wasn't just about winning or losing in the courtroom. It was about making a statement that couldn't be ignored. The next day, Malik met with Andrea to discuss the settlement offer. They sat in their usual corner of the firm's conference room, the tension between them palpable. "I'm afraid Lisa might take the settlement," Malik said, running a hand through his hair. "She's scared. She doesn't want to keep fighting." Andrea sighed, leaning back in her chair. "It's a tough decision. She's been through a lot, and the company knows how to play on that. But this isn't just her decision. It's about all of us, about showing that no one can be bought off when the truth is at stake." Malik nodded, feeling the weight of those words. He wasn't sure if Lisa would listen to him, but he couldn't back down. He had come too far, and he couldn't let this system win just because it was easier. "We need to get her to see the bigger picture," Malik said. "If she takes the settlement, it'll be over. No one will ever know what really happened, and the company will keep doing the same thing." Andrea considered this for a moment, then pushed a stack of papers across the table toward him. "I've been working on a new strategy. It's aggressive, but it could turn things around. If we go public, if we get the media involved, we can force the company's hand. They won't be able to keep sweeping things under the rug." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Going public? That's risky." "It is. But it's also our best shot at making a real impact," Andrea replied. "If we can get the right story out there, if we show how Lisa's case is just one example of a much bigger problem, we could ignite a public outcry. The company won't be able to ignore that." Malik leaned forward, staring at the papers in front of him. He had always known that going public was a dangerous move. It could cost them the case, but it could also give them the leverage they needed. If they could turn the media into an ally, they might have a chance of breaking through the company's defenses. "This is a huge gamble," Malik said, his voice low. "We could lose everything." Andrea looked at him with a steady gaze. "Sometimes, Malik, you have to take risks if you want to make a real difference. We can't win this case quietly. We need to make noise." Malik thought about it for a moment, then made his decision. "Let's do it. Let's go public. But we need to make sure we're ready for the backlash. We need to have our facts lined up, every detail covered." Andrea smiled, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. "I knew you'd come around. I'll start working with the press. You focus on Lisa. We'll need her on board if we're going to make this work." That afternoon, Malik met with Lisa at her apartment. She looked exhausted, and her eyes were red from lack of sleep. She hadn't been responding to his messages, and Malik could tell she was wrestling with the decision to take the settlement. "Lisa," Malik began gently, sitting down across from her, "I know they've made you an offer. And I understand why it's tempting. But I need you to understand something. If you take the settlement, it's over. They'll get away with everything. She looked down at her hands, twisting the fabric of her shirt. I don't know if I can keep fighting. I'm tired, Malik. This is taking everything out of me. Malik reached across the table, taking her hands in his. I know it's hard. But if you take the settlement, it's not just your fight. It's everyone who's been mistreated, everyone who's been silenced. If we let them buy you off, they'll keep doing it, over and over again. We can't let them win. Lisa looked up, her eyes filled with uncertainty. What if I lose? What if this whole thing falls apart? Malik squeezed her hands, his voice unwavering. We won't let it fall apart. We're in this together. And we have a chance to make a real change, to show the world that the truth matters more than anything. We're going to fight. And I believe we can win. For a long moment, Lisa didn't say anything. The silence hung in the air, thick with the weight of the decision she had to make. But then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll do it. I'll keep fighting. Malik's heart swelled with a sense of relief and resolve. They were no longer just fighting for one person's justice. They were fighting for a movement. And they were going to win. The moment Malik made the decision to go public, everything changed. It was as though a switch had been flipped. What had once been a quiet, behind-the-scenes legal battle quickly erupted into a media frenzy. News outlets, social media platforms, and local community groups began picking up the story. Lisa's case was no longer just about one woman's fight for justice, it became a symbol of the larger, systemic issue of discrimination in the workplace. Malik had seen the power of the media before, but never like this. He had to brace himself for the storm that was about to hit. He and Andrea worked tirelessly to ensure they controlled the narrative, not letting the company or their opponents twist the facts. The challenge wasn't just about presenting the truth, it was about making sure the right story reached the public. They organized an exclusive interview for Lisa with a well-known journalist who had a reputation for exposing corporate corruption. Malik made sure Lisa was ready, giving her time to rehearse the key points she needed to make. He knew this interview could be the turning point in the case. If it went well, the public pressure on the company would be immense. The night before the interview, Malik sat in his office, scrolling through the countless media mentions of Lisa's case. The headline of the most recent article read, "Former employee takes on corporation over racial discrimination, will she win?" Malik couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They were fighting for something bigger than just a lawsuit. They were fighting for accountability, for justice, for the people who had been silenced for too long. But it also made the stakes higher. If they lost now, the public fallout would be catastrophic, not just for Lisa, but for him as well. The next morning, Malik met Lisa at the firm's conference room. She looked nervous, and who could blame her? This was a major step, and the pressure was mounting. But she was determined. Her resolve had strengthened since their last meeting, and she was ready to face the world. "You're going to do great," Malik said, offering her a reassuring smile as he handed her a cup of coffee. "I hope so," Lisa replied, taking a sip, her hands shaking slightly. "I'm not used to being in the spotlight like this. But I'm doing it for everyone who can't speak up." Malik nodded. "Exactly. You're not just telling your story. You're telling the story of so many others who've been treated unfairly. And we need to make sure the world hears it." The interview took place in a small, studio-like setting. The journalist, a woman named Rachel Simmons, greeted Malik and Lisa with a firm handshake and a warm smile. She had a reputation for getting to the heart of the matter, cutting through the corporate spin and exposing the truth. Malik trusted her, but he still felt a knot in his stomach. The world was watching, and this interview could be the most critical moment of the case. As the camera began rolling, Rachel's voice filled the room. Lisa, thank you for joining us today. I know this isn't easy, but your story is one that needs to be heard. Let's start from the beginning. Can you tell us about your experience working for the company? Lisa took a deep breath and began. I worked for the company for over 5 years. I put in the hours, did everything I was supposed to do. But despite my hard work, I kept getting passed over for promotions. I was always told the same thing, that I needed more experience, more qualifications. But the people who were promoted over me, they didn't have more experience. They weren't more qualified. They were just, not me. Malik watched closely, his heart pounding in his chest. Lisa was speaking from the heart, and he could see that the truth was resonating in her voice. This wasn't a rehearsed statement, it was raw, honest, and powerful. Rachel leaned forward. That's a powerful statement, Lisa. But as you know, the company has already denied any allegations of discrimination. They've even made a settlement offer, offering you money to drop the case. Why not just take the money and walk away? Lisa hesitated for a moment, glancing at Malik, who nodded encouragingly. Because this isn't just about money. It's about making sure this never happens again. The company wants to silence me, but I'm not going to let them. I'm standing up for myself and for anyone who's been treated unfairly. They can offer me all the money they want, but it won't change the fact that I was discriminated against. Rachel nodded, clearly moved by Lisa's words. That's incredibly brave. But I imagine it hasn't been easy for you. How has this entire process affected your life, both personally and professionally? Lisa looked down for a moment, collecting her thoughts. It's been hard. Really hard. I've lost friends over this. People I thought I could trust turned their backs on me. And professionally, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to get another job in this industry. But it's worth it. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. Malik felt a surge of pride. Lisa's courage was undeniable. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for a cause that went far beyond her personal pain. This was the moment the world needed to see. Lisa was a hero, and she was using her voice to expose a system of injustice that had been hidden for too long. The interview aired that evening, and by the time Malik checked his phone, the response had been overwhelming. Social media was abuzz with support for Lisa. Hashtags like #JusticeForLisa and #CorporateAccountability began trending. People from all over the world were expressing their outrage at the company's actions and praising Lisa for her bravery. But Malik knew that with public support came even more pressure. The company would now be on the defensive, scrambling to control the narrative. They would do everything in their power to discredit Lisa and paint her as a troublemaker. The media storm was just beginning, and it would only get more intense from here. Andrea called him late that night, her voice full of energy. The interview was a success. It's everywhere, Malik. The press is all over it. We've got a real shot at making a difference. Malik couldn't help but feel a surge of optimism. We've started something. Now we have to make sure we finish it. But Andrea's tone shifted, becoming more serious. There's one thing we need to be prepared for, though. The company is going to fight back harder now. They'll dig into Lisa's past, try to find any dirt they can. We can't let them distract us from the truth. Malik felt the weight of her words. The fight was far from over. The media storm was just the beginning. They had taken a huge step forward, but the road ahead was long and fraught with danger. We'll be ready, Malik said, his voice determined. We're not backing down now. The public outcry following Lisa's interview was nothing short of explosive. News outlets, both local and national, were covering the case. Social media was flooded with posts supporting Lisa, demanding justice, and calling for accountability. For Malik and Andrea, it felt like they were riding a wave of momentum they couldn't afford to let crash. But the company wasn't going to let this fight slip through their fingers. Malik knew that the next few days would be crucial. Lisa's decision to go public had ignited a firestorm, but the company's legal team wasn't going to sit back and let them win without a fight. The first sign that the company was fighting back came late the next afternoon. Malik was sitting in his office, reviewing legal documents, when his phone buzzed. It was an email from Andrea. "We've got a problem. The company has just issued a statement. They're claiming that Lisa fabricated her story and are demanding the media retract their coverage. They're calling her allegations unfounded and malicious. They're coming at us hard. Expect a press conference soon." Malik stared at the screen, the words on the page blurring as his mind raced. This was their next move. The company had gone on the offensive. And if they could turn the tide in the media, they could wipe out everything Lisa had worked for. "What do we do now?" he murmured to himself, setting the phone down. Just as Malik was about to head out to meet Andrea, his office door swung open. Andrea stood there, her expression grim. "They're doing everything they can to discredit us, Malik," she said, walking in and taking a seat. "They've already got a public relations firm working on damage control, and they're flooding the media with statements. They're painting Lisa as a disgruntled employee who's just trying to make a quick buck." Malik clenched his jaw. "Of course they are. They're trying to bury her, to make her look like a liar. They'll stop at nothing." Andrea leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "We need to hit back harder. We have the truth on our side, but they have power, money, and influence. We can't let them drown us out." Malik nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. He couldn't afford to let the company dictate the narrative. "Not now. Let's meet with Lisa tomorrow," he said. "We'll show her the company's response and make sure she's ready for what's coming. She can't back down now." The next day, Malik and Andrea met with Lisa at her apartment. She looked more frazzled than usual, her face drawn with the stress of the situation. But there was a fire in her eyes, a determination Malik hadn't seen in her before. "The company sent me a letter," Lisa said, her voice shaking but steady. "They're trying to force me to retract everything. They're saying I'm lying, that I'm just out for money. It's the same old story. But I'm not going to back down." Malik smiled, feeling a surge of pride for her. This was the strength they needed. The company could attack all they wanted, but Lisa's resolve was unshakable. "They want to make you feel small, like your voice doesn't matter," Andrea said. "But it does. It's the truth that matters here. And we can't let them drown it out." Lisa nodded, wiping away a tear. "I don't care what they say anymore. I'm not going to let them win. I know what they did to me. And I know I'm not the only one." Malik felt the weight of her words. Lisa wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for all the people who had been silenced, for everyone who had been ignored. Her courage was starting to shine through, and that was the thing that could turn the tide. "Good," Malik said. "We're not backing down either. We'll push back, harder than ever. But we need to stay focused. We have to keep our eyes on the prize, getting the truth out there and making sure they can't cover it up." The next few days were a blur of activity. The company was ramping up their media campaign, desperately trying to maintain control. Press conferences were being held daily, each one more aggressively defensive than the last. They threw accusations of fabrications and lies, questioning Lisa's credibility and claiming the case was a baseless attack on their reputation. But Malik, Andrea, and Lisa didn't flinch. They ramped up their counterattack, focusing on the details, the small, damning details that the company couldn't explain away. They dug into the records, finding the emails and memos that proved the company had been aware of Lisa's mistreatment and had done nothing to address it. They contacted more witnesses, people who had worked with Lisa and had seen the discrimination firsthand. They were building an arsenal of evidence, and the media was taking notice. Then, the bombshell hit. Andrea had been working behind the scenes to get a few key whistleblowers to come forward. These were employees who had been in the company for years and had witnessed discriminatory practices firsthand. It wasn't just Lisa's word anymore. They had more people willing to testify about the toxic culture that had been allowed to fester. One of the whistleblowers, a former supervisor named Derek, agreed to sit down for an interview. He had seen the way Lisa had been treated, how her accomplishments were ignored, how her work was undervalued, simply because of her race. And now, he wanted to make sure the truth was known. Malik and Andrea watched as the interview aired live. "Derek, thank you for coming forward. Can you tell us about what you witnessed while working at the company?" the reporter asked. Derek cleared his throat before speaking. "I was a supervisor for nearly 10 years at the company. And during that time, I saw things that were wrong, things I knew I had to speak up about. I saw Lisa being passed over for promotions again and again, even though she was more qualified than most of the people they promoted. I saw other employees of color getting the same treatment. It was like they were invisible. The company didn't care." The reporter pressed him further. "Why did you wait until now to speak out?" "I tried to speak up back then. I tried to talk to HR, but they ignored me. I was afraid to lose my job. But now I can't stay quiet anymore. Lisa deserves justice, and the truth needs to come out." The media storm had been a double-edged sword. While Lisa's case gained massive support, the company was not going to take this sitting down. Malik knew better than to expect anything less than a full-fledged counterattack. They were dealing with a powerful corporation that had money, connections, and a vast network at its disposal. This fight was far from over. It wasn't long before Malik received the first official strike from the company's legal team. It came in the form of a cease and desist letter, demanding that Lisa retract her public statements and apologize for what they deemed false accusations against the company. Malik wasn't surprised, it was exactly the kind of aggressive move he expected. But what really caught his attention was the threat buried in the letter: if Lisa didn't comply, they would file a countersuit for defamation and damage to their reputation. "I thought this was coming," Malik said, leaning over his desk, reading the letter carefully. "They're going to try to intimidate us. But we can't let them scare us into silence. We have the truth, and we can't back down now." Andrea, sitting across from him, scowled. "It's a classic tactic. They're trying to drown us in legal threats and force us to backpedal. But we won't. Not when we're this close." Malik nodded, his eyes narrowing. "We'll fight them on every front. But we need to stay focused. If we want to win this, we need to stay one step ahead. We can't get caught up in their distractions." Andrea was already on her phone, preparing for their next move. "I'm reaching out to the press. We need to turn this letter into a story, make it clear to the public that this is just another attempt to silence us. Let them see the company for what it really is." Malik agreed. The more public support they could rally, the harder it would be for the company to bully them. And they had the perfect person to continue the fight, Lisa. Her voice had become a beacon of hope for so many people who had faced similar discrimination, and they had to ensure that it didn't get drowned out by legal threats. Later that afternoon, Malik and Andrea met with Lisa to discuss the cease and desist letter. She looked exhausted but determined, ready for whatever came next. "They're trying to scare me," Lisa said, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. "But I'm not backing down. I've already lost so much. I'm not going to lose this fight." Malik smiled, proud of her resolve. "We're with you, Lisa. We'll fight this all the way. And you don't have to do it alone anymore. The world is listening." Lisa nodded, a small but determined smile crossing her face. "I've always felt like my voice didn't matter. But now I know it does. I'm not just fighting for me anymore. I'm fighting for everyone who's been treated like I was." Andrea chimed in, her voice full of conviction. "And we're going to make sure the world hears you loud and clear. We'll amplify this story until it reaches the ears of those who can make a difference." Malik could see that Lisa had grown in ways he hadn't anticipated. What started as a fight for her own justice was now a fight for systemic change. She wasn't just speaking up for herself, she was becoming the voice for those who had been overlooked and silenced by powerful institutions. Malik knew that if they could harness this momentum, they would have more than just a case, they would have a movement. The following days saw a flurry of activity. Malik, Andrea, and Lisa worked tirelessly to respond to the company's legal threats. They issued a statement, calling out the company's attempt to silence Lisa and demand a retraction of her public statements. They reiterated their commitment to the truth, making it clear that the company's tactics would not intimidate them. Simultaneously, Andrea coordinated with various media outlets, ensuring that the story didn't die down. They worked with reporters who were willing to dig deeper into the company's history of discrimination, and they secured interviews with former employees who were eager to come forward. The more they uncovered, the more the company's conduct was exposed. But it wasn't just the press that they had to worry about. Behind the scenes, Malik knew that the company was pulling every string they could. They had begun to reach out to other potential witnesses, trying to find people who could discredit Lisa and her claims. They also began leaking information about Lisa's past, hoping to muddy the waters and turn the public against her. Malik wasn't worried about that. He knew Lisa's story and the evidence they had would stand up to any scrutiny. It was just a matter of keeping the pressure on and ensuring the public didn't lose sight of the bigger picture. One afternoon, while reviewing some new evidence, Malik received a phone call from an old friend, Jenna, a journalist who worked for a major news outlet. Jenna had been following the case closely and had seen the company's attempt to discredit Lisa. She wanted to meet in person. "I think I have something for you," Jenna said, her voice urgent. "I've been digging into the company's past, and I think I've found something big. It could be the piece we need to take them down once and for all." Malik was intrigued. "What did you find?" Jenna paused, as if gathering her thoughts. The company had an internal diversity program that they touted as a way to promote inclusion. But when I dug deeper, I found out it was a sham. The program wasn't designed to help employees of color at all. In fact, it was a front to protect the company from backlash while maintaining the status quo. They were making it look like they cared about diversity, but behind the scenes, they were perpetuating the very discrimination they claimed to fight against. Malik's pulse quickened. This was it. The smoking gun they needed. "Jenna, this could change everything. Can you get me all the details?" "I'll send you everything I have," Jenna said. "But you need to act fast. I think the company knows I'm on to them. They've already started scrambling to cover their tracks." Malik hung up the phone, adrenaline coursing through his veins. This was the breakthrough they needed. If they could expose the company's hypocrisy, if they could prove that they had been actively pretending to address diversity issues while perpetuating them behind closed doors, their case would be unbeatable. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? With the explosive new evidence in hand, Malik, Andrea, and Lisa felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had something the company couldn't ignore, something that could turn the tide of the entire battle. But they also knew that this would be the moment when the company would stop at nothing to crush them. This was the moment when everything could go either way. The day after Malik received the internal company documents from Jenna, they met at the firm to strategize their next move. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on any of them. "We can't waste any time," Malik said, pacing the room as Andrea and Lisa sat quietly. "This is the kind of evidence that could destroy their whole narrative. We need to get this in front of the media immediately. The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks." Andrea was already preparing the press release. "I'll draft the statement, but we need to make sure we're ready for the inevitable backlash. The company will fight dirty, and they'll try to spin this in every direction." Lisa, who had been quietly absorbing the strategy, finally spoke up. "I'm ready. I've spent years watching them get away with this, and now I'm not backing down. Let's show the world who they really are. Malik looked at her, admiration in his eyes. We're with you all the way, Lisa. This is about more than just winning a case. It's about giving people a voice who've been silenced for far too long. The next morning, they released the statement. The media frenzy was immediate. News outlets around the country picked up the story, and social media erupted. Lisa's courage was being celebrated nationwide. People began to share their own experiences of discrimination in the workplace, using the hashtag #JusticeForLisa. It was no longer just a lawsuit, it was a movement. However, as expected, the company came out swinging. Their legal team issued a statement denying the allegations and labeling the newly uncovered evidence as fabricated and taken out of context. They accused Malik and his team of orchestrating a smear campaign. But this time, it was different. People were starting to see through the company's lies. Look at this, Andrea said, showing Malik her phone. The company is trying to bury us with more legal threats. They're accusing us of falsifying documents. Malik wasn't surprised. He knew this was coming. But what caught his attention was something else. Their legal team was now targeting not just Lisa but the journalists who had broken the story. They were trying to intimidate the press into retracting their coverage. They're pulling out all the stops, Malik said, his jaw tight. They know they're losing control of the narrative. But we can't let them silence the truth. We need to keep pushing forward. Later that day, Malik received an unexpected phone call. It was from Jenna, the journalist who had given them the smoking gun of evidence. I need to meet with you, urgently, Jenna said, her voice tight. The company has reached out to my editor. They're trying to discredit me, saying I have a personal vendetta against them. They've even threatened to sue the news outlet. I don't know how much longer I can keep this story alive. Malik's stomach sank. The company was going after everyone, not just Lisa and her team. They were now attempting to intimidate the very people who had supported them. This was bigger than just a legal case now. It was a war of attrition. I understand, Malik replied, keeping his voice calm. We need to stay strong. I'll help you however I can. Don't let them scare you. Jenna hesitated. They're playing dirty, Malik. But I'm not backing down. The truth is out there. They can try to shut us down, but they can't erase what's already been uncovered. Malik hung up the phone, frustration mounting in his chest. He needed to find a way to protect everyone involved in this case. They couldn't afford to lose the support of the media now. The public was rallying behind Lisa, and they couldn't let the company bury this with intimidation. The following days were a blur of media coverage, public statements, and mounting pressure. The company had filed their counterclaim, seeking to dismiss Lisa's case, but they were also using their power to wage a public relations war. They hired a high-profile public relations firm to handle their image, and soon, they started flooding the airwaves with their side of the story. They launched attack ads against Lisa, calling her unstable and accusing her of attempting to extort the company for money. They brought in experts who tried to discredit the evidence by claiming it was taken out of context. But Malik wasn't worried. He knew that this was their last-ditch attempt to save face. The public wasn't buying it anymore. The company had already lost its grip on the narrative. Malik had one more move left to make. He arranged for a live television interview with Lisa. It was a risky move, but it was the right one. She had nothing left to hide, and the world needed to hear her story from her own mouth. The interview was scheduled for prime time. Lisa, Malik, and Andrea sat in front of the cameras, ready to go live. The tension in the room was palpable, but Lisa's confidence was unwavering. The interviewer, a well-known journalist named Greg, greeted Lisa with a smile. Thank you for joining us tonight, Lisa. You've been through so much in the past few weeks. Can you tell us why you've decided to speak out? Lisa took a deep breath and looked into the camera. I'm here because I want the truth to come out. I'm not just fighting for myself. I'm fighting for every person who's ever been overlooked, undervalued, or mistreated. The company I worked for, they had a program that was supposed to help people like me. But it was a lie. It was all just a front. I'm here to make sure that no one else has to suffer like I did. The words were powerful, but it was the emotion in her voice that made an impact. Lisa's sincerity shone through, and the nation was watching. Greg nodded, his voice softening. You've mentioned that you were passed over for promotions, even though you were more qualified than your colleagues. What made you decide to go public with this? I had enough, Lisa said, her voice steady but firm. I knew the system was broken. I knew it was never going to change unless someone stepped up. I was tired of watching people like me get passed over and ignored, just because of the color of our skin. If I didn't speak out now, nothing would ever change. The interview went on for another 20 minutes, with Lisa calmly and eloquently explaining her experiences and her reasons for fighting back. It was clear to the world that she wasn't just a disgruntled former employee, she was a woman who had been wronged and was determined to make sure no one else would have to endure the same injustices. By the end of the interview, the public was in uproar. Social media exploded with support for Lisa. Her courage had ignited something in people across the country, and for the first time, it felt like the fight was shifting in their favor. The days following Lisa's televised interview were a whirlwind. The outpouring of public support for her was overwhelming. Social media was ablaze with messages of solidarity, with people from all walks of life sharing their own stories of workplace discrimination. Lisa's words had struck a chord with millions, and the momentum was undeniable. But Malik knew that the company would not back down so easily. Within 24 hours of the interview airing, the company filed a motion to dismiss the case. They were moving forward with their countersuit for defamation, accusing Lisa of attempting to damage the company's reputation with fabricated allegations. The legal team was clearly working overtime, trying to discredit every bit of evidence they could. But the public was no longer on their side. The company's legal team had underestimated how much of a force the public's opinion could be. They hadn't counted on Lisa's ability to connect with people, or the way her story resonated with so many who had faced similar struggles. What started as a personal battle had become a public crusade. And now, the company found itself facing a tide of backlash from not only those who had rallied behind Lisa but also from organizations advocating for social justice, fairness in the workplace, and equality. Malik sat in his office late that night, reviewing the company's latest filing. The motion to dismiss was packed with every tactic they had at their disposal, spinning the narrative, attacking Lisa's character, and dismissing their evidence. But Malik wasn't worried. He had anticipated this move, and he was ready to counter it with everything they had. Lisa won't back down, he muttered to himself. Neither will we. Andrea walked into the office, carrying a stack of new documents. She looked at Malik with determination. I've been in touch with several former employees who were part of that diversity program. They're ready to testify. They're just waiting for the green light. Malik nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. We'll need all the support we can get. This case is going to be more than just about Lisa. It's about revealing the systemic failure at the heart of the company. Andrea dropped the stack of papers on his desk. I also reached out to some of the top law firms. We're going to need expert witnesses to back up our claims about the company's discriminatory practices. They're already using their resources to turn this into a PR battle, so we need to come out swinging. Malik's mind was already racing. He knew that this was the most critical phase of the case. The company would do everything in its power to bury the truth, and they had the resources to make it happen. But Malik had one thing the company didn't, the truth itself. We need to hit them where it hurts, Malik said. We're not just fighting for Lisa anymore. We're fighting for the truth. We have to make it clear that the company's actions are not just a few isolated incidents. This is a pattern of systemic discrimination that's been going on for far too long. The following weeks were a blur of preparation. Malik, Andrea, and Lisa worked tirelessly, gathering witnesses, preparing depositions, and assembling the strongest case they could. Lisa's strength only seemed to grow as the days passed. She was no longer just a victim in the eyes of the public, she was a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope for all those who had suffered in silence. Malik had arranged for the testimony of several former employees who had been part of the diversity program and had witnessed firsthand how it was merely a facade. Their stories were powerful. They spoke of being promised opportunities and support, only to find that the program was little more than a marketing tool designed to appease critics while maintaining the status quo of inequality. These testimonies would be crucial in proving that the company's claims of diversity and inclusion were nothing but a sham. As the trial date approached, Malik knew they had the upper hand. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the company still had a few tricks up its sleeve. They were powerful, and they had the kind of influence that could sway public opinion. Malik needed to be ready for anything. One evening, as the team gathered in their office for their final pre-trial strategy meeting, Malik laid out their plan of attack. "Here's how we're going to win this," Malik said, his voice steady but urgent. "We have the evidence, and we have the witnesses. But we need to keep the pressure on the company at all times. We'll attack their credibility every step of the way. When they try to undermine Lisa, we hit back with her strength. When they try to play the victim card, we expose their lies." Andrea looked at him, her eyes narrowing. "And when they come for the press? They'll try to discredit Jenna and everyone else who's helped us." Malik's eyes burned with resolve. "That's when we go public with everything. If they try to silence the press, we'll turn the spotlight on them. We'll show the world who they really are. There's no turning back now." The first day of trial arrived, and it was as intense as Malik had imagined. The courtroom was packed with reporters, attorneys, and spectators. Lisa sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture confident, though Malik could see the nerves beneath the surface. She was about to face the company she had worked for, the company that had destroyed her career and tried to ruin her life. Malik placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've got this, Lisa. Remember, you're not alone." The judge called the court to order, and both sides presented their opening statements. The company's attorneys tried to paint Lisa as an opportunist looking to extort a large settlement. They questioned her motivations, trying to suggest that her allegations were driven by personal gain rather than a desire for justice. But Malik wasn't having it. He rose to deliver their opening statement, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence in this case will show that the company we are suing is not just guilty of individual acts of discrimination. They are guilty of maintaining an entire system designed to discriminate against employees of color. The so-called diversity program was nothing more than a tool to make the company look good to the public while doing nothing to address the real problems inside." Malik continued, laying out their case in a way that made the jury, and everyone in the room, understand that this wasn't just about one employee's claim. It was about a company that had spent years hiding behind a veil of inclusivity while perpetuating a culture of exclusion. The company had built its fortune on the backs of employees who had been exploited, marginalized, and ignored. When Malik finished, he could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. He knew it wasn't over, this was only the beginning. But for the first time since this fight began, Malik felt a sense of certainty. They were on the right side of history, and no amount of corporate power could change that. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the trial entered its second week. Every day, Malik felt the weight of the stakes grow heavier. The company's legal team had been pulling out all the stops, and it was clear they were trying to do more than just win, they were trying to break the will of Lisa, Malik, and everyone involved in the case. It was working. Lisa was holding strong, but Malik could see the toll the case was taking on her. She spent late nights poring over documents, reliving the painful memories of her mistreatment. It was hard, and Malik knew it would only get harder before it got easier. But every time Lisa spoke out in court, every time she shared her story, the jury leaned closer, the public took notice, and the company's grip on the case loosened just a little more. But now, the company had begun a new tactic. They were targeting Malik personally. They were accusing him of exploiting Lisa's case for his own professional gain, painting him as an opportunistic lawyer who was only interested in making a name for himself at the expense of his client. The media, which had once been on their side, was starting to shift. A few critics questioned Malik's motives, and the pressure was beginning to show. At the end of one particularly grueling day in court, Malik returned to his office, exhausted but determined. He walked in to find Andrea and Lisa already there, both with concerned looks on their faces. "Malik, you okay?" Andrea asked, her voice gentle but filled with concern. He gave a small nod. "I'm fine. It's just a lot right now. They're coming at us from all sides, trying to discredit the evidence, attack our witnesses, and now, targeting me. It's a distraction. But we can't let them succeed. The truth is on our side." Lisa looked at him, her expression resolute. "They can say whatever they want, Malik. It doesn't change the fact that I lived through this. They can't take away my story." Malik smiled at her determination. "You're right. They can't take that from you." But Andrea wasn't convinced. "They're pushing hard. If they succeed in turning the jury against us, if they plant enough doubt, it'll be over. We have to stay ahead of them." Malik knew she was right. The company's legal strategy wasn't just about fighting the case, it was about eroding their credibility at every opportunity. They were attacking everything, their evidence, their witnesses, even their motives. "I'll make sure we stay ahead," Malik said. "We're not backing down. I'm calling in reinforcements. We need more expert witnesses, more support from the media. This is about more than just us now. It's about everyone who's been silenced by companies like this. We're not just fighting for one person, we're fighting for all of them." Andrea nodded. "Let's do it." The next few days were a blur of frantic meetings, phone calls, and preparation. Malik reached out to several high-profile advocates for workplace equality, hoping to bring them in as expert witnesses to further solidify their case. He also made strategic moves to ensure they had support from influential media figures who would not back down under pressure. But as the trial continued, Malik began to notice something else, something that gave him a renewed sense of urgency. The company was not only trying to destroy their case, they were also trying to bury the stories of countless others who had suffered like Lisa. They were attempting to make it seem as if Lisa's case was an isolated incident, when in reality, it was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. One morning, as Malik sat at his desk, reading through the latest documents, he was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Jenna, the investigative journalist who had uncovered the smoking gun of evidence that had shifted the direction of the case. She walked in with a grim look on her face. "I've got something," Jenna said, sitting down. She handed Malik a folder filled with new documents. "I've been digging deeper. The company has been hiding something even bigger." Malik opened the folder, scanning through the papers quickly. His heart began to race as he saw what she was pointing to, internal communications between top executives that confirmed not just discrimination against employees of color, but a long history of covering up sexual harassment complaints. The documents detailed how the company had paid off victims of harassment to avoid bad press and sweep the issue under the rug. These weren't just employees complaining about unfair treatment, these were individuals whose very safety and dignity had been violated. "This could change everything," Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jenna nodded. "I've got several more sources who are willing to go on the record. This could be the tipping point." Malik stood up, pacing the room. "We have to get this into the trial. We need to expose the full extent of their corruption. This isn't just about racial discrimination anymore. This is a systematic cover-up of harassment and exploitation." Andrea, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. But if we use this, we risk overloading the jury. We don't want them to feel like we're throwing too many accusations at once. Malik nodded, deep in thought. I know. But this is bigger than just Lisa's case. We can't let them get away with this. They've been hiding behind a false image of integrity for too long. It's time to bring it all to light. The following week, Malik and his team decided to take the bold step of introducing the new evidence into the trial. They weren't just going to prove that Lisa was a victim of discrimination, they were going to show the world that the company had been engaging in a pattern of systemic misconduct for years. The new evidence was explosive, and Malik knew it would rattle the company to its core. He also knew it would escalate the fight to a new level. They couldn't go back after this. The company would undoubtedly try to use every resource at its disposal to discredit the evidence and protect their image. But Malik wasn't worried. He had the truth, and the truth had a way of cutting through all the noise. The trial had entered its final phase. The courtroom had become a battleground, where each side was throwing everything they had left into the fight. Lisa, Malik, and their team had exposed the company's most shameful secrets, but now they had to wait for the final verdict. Every moment seemed to stretch on forever, the weight of the case pressing down on them. As the days dragged on, the public continued to rally behind Lisa, amplifying her message through social media, news outlets, and public protests. What started as a personal battle had grown into a movement, one that transcended Lisa's story and brought attention to systemic issues across industries. But as much as Malik wanted to savor the victory of changing public opinion, he knew it wasn't enough. They needed a legal win, something that would hold the company accountable. The company's legal team, on the other hand, was working just as hard to salvage their position. They had brought in high-profile experts to testify about workplace dynamics, diversity programs, and legal interpretations, hoping to convince the jury that their actions were justifiable or that they hadn't done anything illegal. But Malik had anticipated every move. He knew how to counter every piece of their argument, and he had come prepared. However, the psychological toll of the trial was becoming more evident, especially on Lisa. She had been strong, determined, and resilient from the beginning. But as the trial wore on, the memories of the toxic environment she had endured at the company resurfaced in full force. The days spent reviewing deposition transcripts, reliving the harassment, and hearing the company's defense made her feel as if she were back in that same place of helplessness. Malik could see the strain on her face, but he refused to let her give up. He knew that they had come too far, and they were too close to the finish line. One evening, after a particularly brutal cross-examination by the company's attorneys, Malik and Lisa sat alone in his office. Lisa was quiet, staring out the window with a distant expression. "You okay?" Malik asked gently, though he knew the answer. Lisa didn't immediately respond. She leaned back in her chair, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "I'm trying to be," she said finally, her voice strained. "I've been through a lot, Malik. Some days, it feels like everything I've done just isn't enough. I'm not sure I can keep going." Malik walked over and sat next to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Lisa, you've already done so much. You've done something that most people would never have the courage to do. You've shown the world what it's like to be silenced by a powerful corporation, and now you're showing them that silence doesn't have to last forever." Lisa sighed, her shoulders slumping. "But what if it's not enough? What if they win?" Malik gave her a small, reassuring smile. "If they win, it won't be because of anything you did. You've done everything right, everything we could. And if we lose, that's not the end. We'll keep fighting. This fight won't stop just because of one case." Lisa looked up at him, her expression still uncertain. "I've been fighting for so long, Malik. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this." Malik nodded, understanding the exhaustion in her voice. "I get it. But this fight, what you've done, it's bigger than just you. You've already changed things. You've already made people start talking. If we win this case, it will set a precedent. It will show that companies can't just get away with exploiting people. Lisa's eyes filled with emotion. I hope so. I really do. You're not alone, Malik said, his voice firm. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together. The final days of the trial arrived, and the tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. The jury had heard from both sides, had seen the evidence, and had been presented with the personal stories of those who had suffered because of the company's practices. Now, it was time for the closing arguments. Malik knew that this would be his moment to bring it all together. He had to make it clear that the company's actions were not just a series of isolated incidents, they were part of a pattern, a systemic culture of exploitation and discrimination that had been allowed to continue for years. Standing before the jury, Malik's voice was steady, yet filled with passion. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Malik began, locking eyes with each of them. What you've heard over the past weeks is not just the story of one woman's struggle, it is the story of thousands. It's the story of a company that chose to turn a blind eye to the discrimination and harassment happening under its watch. It's the story of an institution that prioritized its image over the well-being of its employees, silencing those who spoke out, and protecting those who abused their power. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. This case isn't just about Lisa's fight for justice. It's about all of us. It's about the truth that companies like this one have been hiding behind for far too long. They would have you believe that Lisa's allegations are isolated, that her suffering was an anomaly. But the evidence we've presented shows a different story. This company has been exploiting and oppressing employees for years, and it's time for them to be held accountable. Malik stepped forward, his gaze intense. We have shown you the documents. We have shown you the witnesses. And most importantly, we have shown you the truth. This case is about more than just one lawsuit. It is about bringing light to the darkness, about giving a voice to the voiceless. We owe it to Lisa and to every other person who has been hurt by this company's greed and indifference. We owe it to them to stand up for what's right. Malik turned slightly, addressing the judge as well. I ask you all to look beyond the surface, beyond the lies they've tried to feed you. This is not just a legal battle. This is a moral one. And I ask you to do what is right. To bring justice where it has been denied for so long. The courtroom fell silent as Malik finished his closing statement. He felt the weight of the room on him, but he was undeterred. The battle had been long, and it had been hard, but the truth was now undeniable. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity. Malik, Lisa, and Andrea waited in the courtroom, the minutes ticking by with unbearable slowness. Malik kept his focus on the door, knowing that when it opened, it would either change everything or confirm his worst fears. Finally, after hours of waiting, the door opened. The jury filed back into the room, and the judge called the court to order. Malik's heart was in his throat. The foreman stood and delivered the verdict. Your Honor, we the jury find in favor of the plaintiff, Lisa Brooks. We find the defendant, Goliath Enterprises, guilty of systemic racial discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. Malik couldn't contain the wave of emotion that washed over him. Lisa's hands flew to her face in disbelief, and tears began to form in her eyes. The jury had sided with them. The truth had won. The room erupted in a mixture of gasps and applause. The company's legal team sat in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the magnitude of the verdict. Malik turned to Lisa, his voice thick with emotion. You did it. We did it. Lisa nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. We did it. The aftermath of the trial was nothing short of chaotic. News outlets were abuzz with coverage of the verdict, and the public's response was overwhelmingly positive. Lisa's victory against Goliath Enterprises had sparked a wave of support, not only from those who had followed her journey, but from employees across the country who had lived through similar injustices. It was clear that Lisa's case had become a symbol of resistance, and her story had inspired countless people to come forward with their own experiences. For Malik, the attention was a double-edged sword. While he was proud of the work they had done, he knew that the victory was just one battle in an ongoing war. The company's lawyers, though defeated in court, were not about to let the case die. Malik had heard whispers of an appeal, and despite their loss, the company had an army of public relations experts, hired guns, and resources to try to discredit the case in the public eye. But for now, Malik was savoring the quiet moments. The constant pressure of the trial was over, and he could finally take a breath. He had done what he set out to do, he had proven that the truth would always shine through, no matter how hard the opposition tried to bury it. A few days after the verdict, Malik and Lisa met at a small cafe to talk. The media frenzy had slowed down, but there was still an air of uncertainty lingering. Malik had already made plans to follow up with some of the other victims whose stories had come to light during the trial. There was still a lot of work to be done. Lisa, on the other hand, was processing the whirlwind of emotions that had come with her victory. The burden of speaking out, the courage it took to stay in the fight for so long, it had all paid off. But now, she was facing the aftermath, and it was harder than she expected. She had spent so much time focusing on the case that she hadn't fully considered what life would be like once it was over. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of possibilities. "I'm still processing everything," Lisa said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "I mean, it feels amazing to have won, but at the same time, it's kind of overwhelming, you know. I don't know what comes next." Lisa nodded slowly. "It's just hard to imagine going back to normal life after everything. So many people have been watching me, and I don't know if I can go back to being just me." Malik smiled gently. "You don't have to go back to being just you. You've grown through this, and you've inspired so many people along the way. But don't let it consume you. You deserve peace, too." There was a pause as Lisa looked out the window, her mind clearly in thought. Finally, she spoke again. "You know, Malik, I never could have done this without you. Without your support. You were with me every step of the way." Malik's heart swelled with pride. "You did all the hard work, Lisa. I just helped you amplify your voice. You were the one who fought for what's right, who showed up every day even when it was hard. That's what makes you a hero." Lisa gave him a small, grateful smile. "Still, I couldn't have done it alone." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them reflecting on how far they had come. A few weeks later, things had begun to settle down, but the ripple effects of the trial were far-reaching. Lisa's case was being discussed in boardrooms, schools, and political circles. Activists and labor unions had adopted her as a figurehead for their movements, and people began organizing in her name to continue the fight for better workplace protections and equality. But for Malik, the real work was only just beginning. He had become more than just a lawyer in the eyes of the public, he had become a symbol of the fight for justice. It was an honor, but it also came with an enormous responsibility. Late one evening, Malik sat in his office, working through some new cases. His phone buzzed, and he looked down to see a message from Andrea. "We need to talk. There's something big." Malik frowned, sensing the urgency in her words. He quickly typed back, asking to meet her the next morning. The following day, Andrea arrived at his office looking serious, a stack of files in her hand. She wasted no time getting to the point. "Malik, the company is pushing back harder than we thought. They've already filed their appeal, but there's something else we need to talk about," she said, dropping the stack of files onto his desk. Malik leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What's going on?" Andrea opened one of the files and slid it across the desk to Malik. "They've been quietly reaching out to people who were part of the case, witnesses, former employees, and offering them deals. Financial settlements. They're trying to silence them before they can speak out again." Malik's pulse quickened. What kind of deals? They're promising to buy silence, Andrea explained. But they're not just offering money, they're offering security, protection, and even new jobs. It's like they're trying to bury the truth even further. They don't want this case to snowball into something bigger than what it already is. Malik's mind raced. He had known the company wouldn't go down quietly, but this new development changed everything. The battle wasn't over. It had only just shifted into a new phase. We need to expose this, Malik said, determination setting into his voice. If they think they can just buy their way out of this, they're wrong. We need to find out who they're targeting and make sure their stories come to light. Andrea nodded. We have to act fast. The longer they keep it under wraps, the harder it will be to get ahead of them. Malik stood up, running a hand through his hair. We're not stopping now. We've come too far, and we're not backing down. Let's find out who they've been reaching out to and make sure this gets exposed. Andrea gave a sharp nod. I'll start tracking down the contacts. But we need to be careful. The last thing we need is to risk compromising any of the remaining witnesses. Malik glanced at the files spread across his desk. We've already fought hard for the truth, Andrea. Now, we fight for everyone who's still out there, too. Malik spent the next several days immersed in research, tracking down every lead that came his way. Andrea had already started her own investigation into the company's attempts to settle with key witnesses, and together, they pieced together a web of covert actions designed to discredit and silence anyone who had been involved in the case. Malik had expected the company to fight back, but the lengths they were going to, offering hush money, promising fake job security, and even threatening some of the witnesses, surprised him. It was no longer just a legal case, it was becoming a full-scale battle to protect the truth, and he would stop at nothing to expose what was happening behind closed doors. One afternoon, Malik and Andrea met at a small, discreet cafe to go over their findings. The place was quiet, nestled on a side street in the heart of the city, a perfect place for them to talk without drawing attention. As they sat across from each other, Andrea pulled out a stack of confidential documents, official emails, settlement agreements, and records of payments made by Goliath Enterprises to several former employees. They're offering settlements to anyone who might speak out against them, Andrea said, flipping through the documents. I've found evidence that they've been quietly reaching out to witnesses, offering them deals. Some of these people took the money and signed non-disclosure agreements. Malik's eyes narrowed as he skimmed the papers. It's exactly what we feared. They're trying to buy the silence of everyone who could help us. Andrea's voice was low, filled with frustration. It's not just the money. They're offering to help these witnesses find new jobs, better jobs, in some cases, and they're giving them a sense of security. But in exchange, these witnesses have to agree to stay quiet about what they saw, about what they experienced. Malik rubbed his temples, his mind racing. This was bigger than he had anticipated. The company was leveraging everything they had, money, power, and influence, to cover up their tracks. He knew this was a battle that was going to get ugly, and he needed to act quickly before they silenced everyone involved in the case. We have to expose this, Malik said, his voice firm. We can't let them get away with bribing people into silence. If they're going to keep using their resources to bury the truth, we need to make sure the public knows what's going on. Andrea nodded. I agree. But we need to be strategic. If we just start throwing out information, we might risk the case. We need to prove that they've been manipulating people, and we need to do it without giving them a chance to cover it up. Malik leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. This was going to require all his skill and careful planning. He had no intention of letting the company continue its campaign of intimidation and secrecy. But he also needed to protect the witnesses who had come forward, some of whom were now at risk of losing everything for their honesty. The next day, Malik and Andrea began reaching out to the remaining key witnesses, those who had not yet taken a settlement offer. They spoke to them privately, making sure they understood the potential consequences of their decisions. Many of them were scared. They had seen what the company had done to others, how they had used their wealth and influence to crush people who dared to speak out. Some of them had families to support and were worried about the future. Others feared they would be blacklisted from the industry if they didn't comply with the company's demands. But Malik reassured them. "I know it's hard, but you're not alone in this. We're fighting for all of you, for the truth. Don't let them silence you." It wasn't an easy conversation, and some witnesses still hesitated. But one by one, Malik and Andrea managed to gather enough support to begin piecing together their defense against the company's manipulation. They knew that if they could bring these stories to the public, they would have an even stronger case than before. The strategy was clear: they would need to go public with the company's attempts to silence the witnesses. But they would have to do it in a way that ensured the company couldn't turn the situation around to their advantage. A few days later, Malik and Andrea were in the thick of planning their next move when Malik received a call from Lisa. Her voice was tinged with urgency. "Malik, I think you need to know something," she said, her tone serious. "I've been contacted by someone who claims to know everything about Goliath's dirty dealings. He says he has proof of all the settlements, the threats, everything. But, he's scared. He doesn't want to go public because he's afraid of retaliation." Malik's heart skipped a beat. "Who is he? And how does he know all this?" Lisa hesitated. "His name's Aaron. He used to work for Goliath Enterprises in their HR department. He was one of the people who saw how they were pressuring employees to stay silent. He's been trying to reach out to me for days, but he didn't want to risk putting his name out there until he knew it was safe." Malik's mind immediately started turning. Aaron was exactly the type of person they needed, someone with insider knowledge who could help them prove the company's misconduct. But getting him to testify would be a challenge. If Aaron was afraid, convincing him to come forward could take time. "Can you get him to meet with me?" Malik asked, his voice steady despite the growing tension. "I need to hear what he has to say." Lisa agreed to set up a meeting with Aaron, and Malik spent the next few hours preparing for it. He knew that they couldn't afford to waste any time. If Aaron had the proof they needed, it could change everything. The following day, Malik sat in a quiet conference room, waiting for Aaron to arrive. He was eager, but he knew the importance of being calm and collected. The door opened, and a man in his early 30s walked in. He had a tired look on his face, his eyes darting around as if he were expecting someone to follow him. "Aaron?" Malik stood up to greet him. Aaron nodded, his voice shaky. "Yeah. That's me." Malik gestured for him to sit down. "Thank you for meeting with me. I know this isn't easy, but I promise we're here to protect you." Aaron sat down hesitantly, his hands folded tightly in his lap. "I don't want to end up like the others. I've seen what happens to people who cross Goliath. I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing." Malik leaned forward, his voice reassuring. "You are doing the right thing. You're giving us the information we need to expose the truth. We're not going to let them intimidate you." Aaron sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Okay. Here's everything I know. I've got records of every settlement they've made, emails between the HR department and upper management, and a whole list of people they've threatened. I don't know how they're going to respond, but I can't keep living with this on my conscience." Aaron handed Malik a manila envelope filled with documents. Malik's heart raced as he looked through the papers. This was the proof they needed, proof that Goliath Enterprises had been bribing witnesses, silencing whistleblowers, and covering up their wrongdoing. Malik glanced up at Aaron. "This is everything. You've done the right thing, and we'll make sure you're protected." Aaron nodded, his face pale but determined. "Just promise me one thing, make sure they don't get away with this. I've seen what they're capable of. I don't want anyone else to go through what I did." "You have my word," Malik said firmly. "We'll make sure of it." Malik and Andrea worked tirelessly over the next week, planning their strategy to reveal the truth to the public. The documents Aaron had provided were invaluable: detailed emails, settlement agreements, and even evidence of threats against employees. It was everything they needed to prove that Goliath Enterprises had been actively trying to silence the truth. But Malik knew they couldn't just throw it all out there at once. They needed a well-thought-out approach that would give them the upper hand, one that would force the media, the courts, and the public to pay attention. He wasn't just fighting for the case anymore, he was fighting for the victims who had suffered in silence for far too long. "We need to build a narrative," Malik said as he sat across from Andrea at their usual cafe, his laptop open with the documents spread out in front of them. "The public needs to see not just what the company did, but why it matters. This isn't just about a lawsuit. This is about systemic abuse, and we need to frame it that way." Andrea nodded, tapping her pen on the table as she considered his words. "I agree. We need to connect the dots. People need to see the bigger picture. If we do this right, it'll hit them where it hurts, their reputation." Malik leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with ideas. "I want to go to the media first, but we have to time it right. If we release this information too soon, we risk the company finding a way to counter it before it gains traction. But if we wait too long, they might try to bury it under more PR spin." They both fell into a thoughtful silence as they weighed their options. The weight of what was at stake hung heavy in the air. Goliath Enterprises was a powerful corporation with deep pockets and far-reaching influence. They had already shown their willingness to go to extreme lengths to protect their interests, and Malik knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. But that fight wasn't going to be fought in the boardrooms or the courtroom alone. It was going to be fought in the court of public opinion. After several more days of planning, Malik and Andrea agreed to their approach. They would release the documents and Aaron's testimony to a trusted investigative journalist who had been covering corporate corruption. The plan was to get the information out in a way that was undeniable, using the power of the media to amplify the truth. It was a risky move, but it was their best shot. The journalist they chose was Emily Collins, an award-winning reporter who had been known for her fearless investigations into corporate malfeasance. Malik had met her a few years ago when she had covered another high-profile case he'd worked on, and he trusted her judgment. Emily agreed to meet with Malik and Andrea privately to discuss the strategy. They gathered at a small, secure location that they knew would be safe from prying eyes. "I'm not going to lie, this is huge," Emily said after reviewing the documents Aaron had provided. "If we publish this, it'll be a bombshell. But we also have to be ready for the backlash. Goliath Enterprises has the resources to fight back, and they won't hesitate to come after you." Malik nodded. "We're ready for that. But the longer we wait, the more people they can silence. We can't let them get away with it." Emily sighed, clearly weighing the risks. "I know. And I'm with you on this. We'll run this as an investigative piece, laying out everything from the settlements to the threats. It'll be a multi-part series. We need to make sure we get every detail right. I'll make sure it's airtight before we go public." The day the article was set to be published, Malik could hardly contain his nerves. He knew that once the story broke, there would be no turning back. The floodgates would open, and the world would know what Goliath Enterprises had been doing in the shadows. Andrea was at his side as they sat in his office, waiting for the first reactions to come in. They had already set up secure communication channels with some of the key witnesses to ensure they could stay safe if the company attempted any form of retaliation. At 10 a.m., Emily's piece went live. The headline screamed across the internet: "Goliath Enterprises accused of silencing whistleblowers, inside the corporate cover-up." The article was an exposé of the highest order. It laid bare Goliath's extensive efforts to keep witnesses quiet, offering financial settlements, job offers, and even threats to keep them from speaking out. Emily's investigation included not only the documents Malik and Andrea had uncovered but also Aaron's testimony, which painted a vivid picture of the inner workings of the company's corrupt practices. The piece went viral almost immediately. Social media platforms erupted with outrage, and news outlets picked up the story, sharing it with a global audience. People who had no idea about the case before now found themselves enraged by the sheer scale of Goliath's manipulation. They flooded the comment sections, demanding accountability. Malik sat back in his chair, watching as the world reacted to the story. He felt a wave of satisfaction wash over him, but it was quickly replaced by a deep sense of responsibility. This was just the beginning. Now, they had to see it through to the end. Within hours of the article's release, Goliath Enterprises issued a statement denying all allegations, calling the reports baseless and claiming that the company had always acted in good faith. They also announced that they were considering taking legal action against those involved in the leak. Malik expected nothing less. But it was clear that the damage had already been done. Goliath's carefully crafted image as a respectable corporation had been shattered. People were now questioning everything about the company, its leadership, its business practices, and the way it treated its employees. For Malik and Andrea, the next step was to prepare for the legal battles that were sure to follow. They knew the company would try to fight back in the courts, using every legal loophole and dirty tactic at their disposal. But they were ready. "We've done it," Andrea said, her voice full of conviction. "Now, we wait for them to respond. And we prepare for the next round." Malik nodded, his thoughts already turning to the future. "We've won the first battle. But this war is far from over." The aftermath of the exposé was nothing short of chaotic. News outlets continued to run the story, and social media became a battleground. People from all over the country, and even from other parts of the world, were voicing their outrage. Goliath Enterprises, once a towering presence in the business world, was now on the defensive, trying to salvage its reputation piece by piece. But behind the scenes, Malik and Andrea knew that this was just the beginning. The company's public response had been expected. They denied everything, tried to discredit the evidence, and threatened legal action against anyone involved. The truth was, Malik had anticipated this. The real challenge now was to ensure that the company's power didn't silence them. Malik paced around his office, thinking through their next move. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was Andrea. "Malik, we need to talk," her voice came through the phone, her tone urgent. "I've just received some disturbing news. We've got a whistleblower from inside the company, someone high up. They're ready to talk." Malik's heart skipped a beat. This was the break they needed. "Who is it?" Malik asked, his voice sharp with excitement. "His name is Thomas Warren," Andrea replied. "He's a former executive at Goliath. Apparently, he had a direct hand in handling the settlements. He says he's willing to testify, but he's terrified. Goliath has a long reach, and he's scared they'll come after him and his family." Malik leaned against his desk, his mind racing. This could change everything. An insider like Thomas could provide the final pieces of the puzzle, proof that the company's actions went all the way to the top. "We can't let him be silenced," Malik said. "Set up a meeting. I'll make sure he feels safe." The following evening, Malik and Andrea met with Thomas in a secluded, private location. Thomas was a middle-aged man with graying hair and an air of nervousness that made it clear how much he was risking by coming forward. His hands trembled as he took a seat across from them. "I didn't want to get involved," Thomas began, his voice low. "But after everything that's happened, after seeing how they're trying to bury the truth, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I have to do something." Malik could see the weight of the decision on Thomas's face. The fear was palpable, but so was the resolve. "Tell us everything," Malik urged, his tone gentle but firm. "We need to know what you know." Thomas swallowed hard before speaking. "I worked in the legal department for Goliath for over a decade. I was one of the people who helped facilitate the settlements, the deals to keep employees quiet. But there's more. They knew everything about the risks of their products, the safety violations, and the abuse of power. And they actively chose to cover it up. I was complicit in it. I didn't know how bad it was until it was too late. But I can't live with it anymore. He paused, looking around the room as though he expected someone to burst in at any moment. I've kept records, emails, contracts, internal memos. They were all meant to be destroyed, but I kept copies. I've been holding on to this evidence for years, waiting for the right time to act. Malik's pulse quickened. How much evidence do you have? Enough to bring them down, Thomas said, his voice shaky but determined. I have communications that go all the way to the CEO. This wasn't just a few bad apples. This was a systemic issue, and they knew about it the whole time. Andrea's eyes widened. This was the breakthrough they'd been waiting for. With Thomas's testimony and the evidence he had, they could completely dismantle Goliath Enterprises. We'll make sure you're protected, Malik said, trying to reassure him. But we need to act fast. If you're right, they'll stop at nothing to silence you. Thomas nodded, his eyes filled with both fear and gratitude. I'm ready. I can't live with this secret anymore. With Thomas's testimony and the documents in hand, Malik knew they had everything they needed to take down Goliath. But even with the weight of this powerful evidence, he knew that their fight wasn't over. The company still had the resources to fight back, and they would. They would come after Thomas, they would attack the media, and they would use every legal loophole at their disposal. Malik called an emergency meeting with Andrea, Lisa, and their legal team. They needed to discuss the next steps and make sure they were prepared for the fallout. Malik couldn't afford to be caught off guard again. We have one chance to get this right, Malik said as he stood in front of the room. We'll go public with everything, Thomas's testimony, the documents, the whole story. But we have to make sure we control the narrative. Goliath will do everything they can to discredit us. We can't let them. We need to have everything in place before we go public. Andrea nodded. We'll prep our media contacts and line up a few more journalists. I also think it's time we get an interview with Thomas, so people can see he's not just someone who's hiding behind a keyboard. He's a former executive, and his story matters. Lisa spoke up, her voice firm. And we need to make sure Thomas is safe. We can't let anything happen to him. If Goliath gets wind of this, they'll stop at nothing. Malik agreed. They needed to protect their witnesses, and they needed to make sure that once the truth came out, Goliath would have no room to hide. The next morning, Malik and his team worked tirelessly to prepare for the public reveal. They coordinated with Emily and other journalists, ensuring that the story would reach as many people as possible. They also reached out to various media outlets to make sure they covered the explosive nature of the story. By late afternoon, they had everything in place. Malik, Andrea, and Lisa stood in front of a camera, preparing to record a press statement that would be released alongside the article. This would be their chance to directly address the public, to explain what they had uncovered, and to call for action. Malik took a deep breath, his hands steady as he addressed the camera. This is Malik Johnson, and I stand here today not just as a lawyer, but as someone who believes in truth and justice. For months, my team and I have been investigating Goliath Enterprises, and what we've uncovered is nothing short of shocking. Goliath Enterprises has been actively silencing whistleblowers, paying off victims, and covering up safety violations that endangered the lives of countless individuals. He paused, letting his words sink in. But today, we have the evidence, emails, contracts, testimony from former executives. And we have a choice: we can let them continue to hide in the shadows, or we can stand up and demand accountability. I stand here today with the truth, and we will not back down. Andrea and Lisa stood beside him, nodding in agreement as they watched the footage. This was it. The moment they had been working for. Malik knew that this would be the tipping point. Now, it was time for the world to see Goliath for what it truly was. The day after the press release, Malik and his team were already bracing for the storm that would inevitably follow. Goliath Enterprises had reacted quickly, launching a counteroffensive to discredit the evidence. Their PR team was working overtime, flooding the media with carefully crafted rebuttals that aimed to portray Malik and his team as opportunists chasing fame and fortune. But the public was no fool. The sheer volume of evidence, the consistency of the testimonies, and the credibility of the sources made it difficult for anyone to dismiss the story outright. Still, Goliath's response came in full force, and Malik knew that the company would not go down without a fight. That evening, Malik sat with Andrea and Lisa in their war room, a small conference room that had become their headquarters. The walls were lined with screens showing news coverage, social media feeds, and the growing number of comments flooding in. "I knew they'd come after us, but I didn't expect this kind of smear campaign," Andrea said, her voice laced with frustration as she read through the latest press releases from Goliath. "They're pulling out all the stops," Malik replied, running a hand through his hair. "They've hired a whole team of top lawyers to attack us, and they're digging up anything they can about us personally to make us look bad. They're trying to paint me as some sort of opportunistic lawyer with a vendetta." Lisa, who had been scrolling through her phone, looked up and said, "It's not just about you, Malik. They're going after Thomas, too. The smear campaigns have already started online. They're questioning his credibility, trying to paint him as disgruntled and untrustworthy." Malik clenched his fists. This was what Goliath did. They used their influence to bend the truth, manipulate public perception, and break anyone who stood in their way. They knew that if they could discredit Thomas, they could discredit everything he had exposed. "They won't get away with it," Malik said, his voice sharp. "But we need to be strategic. We can't let them divert attention. We need to stay focused on the facts." The days that followed were a whirlwind of media interviews, legal battles, and intense public scrutiny. Goliath's lawyers filed motions to dismiss the lawsuit, arguing that there was no substantial evidence to support the claims. They also pushed for a gag order to prevent further public disclosures, claiming that the publicity was damaging the company's reputation and influencing potential jurors. In response, Malik doubled down. He worked with Andrea to ensure the evidence they had was rock solid. They gathered even more affidavits from whistleblowers who were now coming forward, emboldened by the growing wave of public support. But it wasn't just the legal fight that weighed on Malik's mind. Every day, the pressure mounted, and the stakes grew higher. Goliath was powerful, and their tactics were ruthless. Every new legal maneuver, every social media post, every corporate release was an attempt to slow them down, to get them to make a mistake. But Malik wasn't backing down. He had never been the type to back down in the face of adversity. His entire career had been built on fighting for justice, and this case was no different. The victims of Goliath Enterprises were counting on him, and he would not let them down. One night, Malik received a late-night call from Emily Collins, the journalist who had helped break the story to the public. Her voice was urgent, laced with concern. "Malik, we've got a problem," she said. "There's a new development. Goliath's lawyers have been contacting some of the witnesses who spoke to me. They're pressuring them to change their statements or risk legal action. I think they're trying to intimidate them into backing down." Malik's stomach churned. This was exactly what he had feared. Goliath wasn't just using legal tactics to win, they were using fear and intimidation to silence those who had dared to speak out. "We can't let them get away with this," Malik said, his voice tight. "Do you have any names?" "Not yet," Emily replied. "But I'm working on it. I just wanted you to know what's going on. You need to prepare for this. It's going to get ugly." Malik sat in silence for a moment, processing the information. He knew Goliath's lawyers were ruthless, but this was a new level of underhandedness. They were now trying to break the very people who had dared to stand up to them. "We need to keep pushing forward," Malik said, his resolve hardening. "We can't let them scare us. We need to protect the witnesses and make sure the public knows what they're doing." If they think they can intimidate us into silence, they're wrong. The next day, Malik and his team took action. They arranged for a press conference to address the growing allegations of witness intimidation. Malik wanted to make sure that the public knew exactly what Goliath Enterprises was doing behind the scenes. The press conference was set up quickly, and as soon as the cameras started rolling, Malik stepped up to the podium. "We are here today because we believe in justice," he began, his voice calm but firm. "We are here today because we believe in the truth. And the truth is that Goliath Enterprises has resorted to intimidation tactics in an attempt to silence the very people who have come forward to expose the truth about their dangerous and unethical practices." The room was silent as Malik continued, outlining the details of the witness intimidation and providing evidence that Goliath's legal team had been making threats against those who had spoken out. "We will not be intimidated," Malik said, looking directly into the cameras. "We will not back down. The truth will come out, and we will hold Goliath Enterprises accountable for the harm they have caused." The press conference was a turning point. The media picked up the story quickly, and the public reaction was one of outrage. The pressure on Goliath mounted, and suddenly, their tactics didn't seem so powerful anymore. People were no longer just sympathizing with the victims, they were angry, and they wanted justice. The courtroom was packed. Malik could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it, the culmination of everything they had fought for. The months of preparation, the late nights, the endless calls, and the strategic planning had all led to this day. The trial of Goliath Enterprises was about to begin, and for Malik, it felt like the last chance to right a wrong that had affected so many lives. His team was by his side, Andrea, Lisa, and even Thomas Warren, who had agreed to testify in person despite the lingering fears that still haunted him. Thomas's courage had been a beacon of hope for the victims, and now it was time for him to take the stand and make his voice heard. The opposing side, the legal powerhouse representing Goliath Enterprises, was already set up. Malik knew they would pull every trick in the book to discredit their evidence. They had made it clear that they would stop at nothing to keep their client's empire intact. But Malik was prepared. They had the truth on their side, and no amount of corporate muscle could erase that. As Malik walked into the courtroom, he felt the eyes of the world on him. The media had been covering the case non-stop, and the public was eagerly awaiting the verdict. He could hear the whispers as he passed by, the hum of anticipation in the air. "Mr. Johnson, the court is ready to begin," the bailiff called out, snapping him out of his thoughts. Malik nodded and took his place at the defense table, glancing briefly at his team before turning to face the judge. Judge Henry Foster, the man who had presided over the case since the beginning, sat at the bench. His reputation as a fair and just judge had earned him respect, but Malik knew that even the most impartial judges could be swayed by the enormity of a case like this. Goliath had money, influence, and the power to make things disappear. But Malik wasn't going to let that happen. Not on his watch. "Your Honor, if it pleases the court," Malik began, standing up to address the judge, "today we bring forth the truth about Goliath Enterprises. A company that has hidden behind a mask of power and prestige for far too long, causing harm to countless individuals while protecting their profits at all costs." The judge nodded, signaling Malik to continue. "We have evidence, we have witnesses, and most importantly, we have the courage of those who have been wronged. Today, we will show this court, and the world, what Goliath Enterprises has tried so desperately to keep hidden." The trial went on for hours. The defense attorneys for Goliath were skilled and well prepared, presenting counterarguments to every piece of evidence that Malik and his team presented. They tried to undermine Thomas's credibility, calling him a disgruntled former employee who had an axe to grind. But Thomas stood firm on the witness stand, his voice steady despite the nerves that had once plagued him. "I was part of the cover-up," Thomas admitted in front of the court, his voice carrying the weight of the truth. "I helped bury evidence that could have saved lives. But I'm here now, because what Goliath did was wrong. And I can't live with that any longer." His words were a bombshell in the courtroom. The tension in the room was palpable as the defense team scrambled to recover, but they couldn't dismiss the sincerity in Thomas's voice. His testimony had been unwavering, and the evidence he provided was irrefutable. Malik watched from his seat, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that this was the moment everything could change, the moment when the truth could no longer be hidden, no matter how hard Goliath tried. After several days of intense cross-examinations, the time finally came for the closing arguments. Malik stood up once more, addressing the court with calm determination. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Malik began, his voice clear and authoritative, "the evidence you have seen over the past week speaks for itself. You have seen the emails, the contracts, and the testimonies of the brave individuals who dared to stand up to a corporation that had no regard for human life or safety." He paused for a moment, making sure that his words landed with the jury. Goliath Enterprises has spent years building a facade of respectability, but underneath that mask is a company that is willing to sacrifice its employees, its customers, and its own ethical standards for the sake of profit. The victims of their negligence and greed are not just numbers on a page, they are real people with families, with lives that have been irrevocably altered. Malik took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping across the jury. "You have a responsibility to deliver justice. You have a chance to make sure that the truth doesn't get buried, that those who suffered under Goliath's reign have their voices heard. And when you deliberate, I ask that you think about the lives that have been affected, the people who've lost everything, and the future we can create if we hold Goliath accountable." The courtroom was silent as Malik finished his closing statement. He knew he had given it everything he had, now, it was in the hands of the jury. The deliberations took several days, each moment dragging on like an eternity for Malik. He stayed in close contact with his team, constantly checking in with Andrea and Lisa to make sure they were prepared for whatever came next. But despite the uncertainty, Malik knew they had done everything they could. Finally, the jury returned to the courtroom. Judge Foster stood and asked everyone to rise as the verdict was read. "Has the jury reached a decision?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor," the foreperson replied, her voice steady but filled with gravity. She turned to face the court, and all eyes were on her. "The jury finds in favor of the plaintiffs," she declared. "Goliath Enterprises is found guilty of gross negligence, corporate malfeasance, and willful misconduct. The company is ordered to pay compensation to the victims and their families, and to undergo a complete overhaul of its corporate practices under strict oversight." The room erupted in mixed reactions, some in disbelief, others in quiet relief, but for Malik, it was the moment of vindication he had been working for. Goliath had been held accountable. The victims had won. Malik's team gathered together in a quiet corner of the courthouse after the verdict was read. Andrea, Lisa, and Thomas stood beside him, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "We did it," Andrea said, a smile breaking through her usual composed demeanor. Malik nodded, his eyes focused but full of gratitude. "We did it. But we couldn't have done it without all of you. Every single one of you played a part in this." Thomas stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me. I never thought I'd see the day when Goliath would finally face the consequences of their actions." Malik smiled at him. "The truth always comes out. And we'll make sure it keeps coming out, no matter what." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?